The Boy Who Drew Cats. Yusuke was a boy who lived in feudal Japan many years ago, and he only loved to do one thing. He loved to draw cats. Now, Yusuke, he drew cats better than anyone you've ever seen. They seemed to have a life all their own. When he would draw a cat, it almost felt like it could leap off the page and jump at you. But people didn't appreciate this talent. You see, his family, they were poor farmers, and the only thing to do that was productive in life was to farm. But Yusuke, he didn't like farming. He didn't like plowing, working in the land. And his parents, they were saying, Yusuke, he's going to be a terrible farmer. We need to find some future for him, some kind of profession, because all he did was draw cats. So they thought of him as a joker, a trickster. And so they said, Yusuke, we know your future's not here on the farm. You won't be able to inherit the family farm. You need to find your future elsewhere. Let's try the priesthood. And so they found a monastery. They talked to the abbot, and they brought Yusuke there, and they enrolled him to train for the priesthood. And he would study the sacred texts just along with all the monks and students and acolytes. But really, he wouldn't pay attention. He'd be studying these texts, and in the margins, he'd be drawing cats, always drawing cats. And he had his little ink that he would have to grind some off and then mix with the water and take the brush to paint those cats on every little piece of paper, till finally they took any blank paper away from Yusuke. They said, you're not focusing. You're not studying what you need to do. And they took away his brush. And one day, the monks, they found Yusuke. He was outside down in the dirt with a little pine needle, drawing a cat in the dirt. One of the most realistic cats you've ever seen. But they said, Yusuke can't give up on this. He won't stop drawing cats. So they said, Yusuke, the priesthood is not right for you either. And they said, Yusuke, I don't know what what the future holds for you. You're not going to be a farmer, and you're not going to be a priest. You better find something to do. So then Yusuke, he left that monastery, and he just wandered the countryside. He would have to beg for food from people, and he just wandered, did odd jobs every now and then, but every spare second he got, he would draw cats on any surface he could find. Well, he wandered the countryside further than any of his family had ever gone, went from town to town, till finally, as he left one town, he was heading up into the mountains, starting to get dark, and he looked all around. Way up at the top of the mountains, he saw a huge monastery up there. He'd never heard of this monastery. But he walked up there, and it looked like it was abandoned. Walked into the monastery, and nobody was around, not a soul. Everything was covered in dust. Looked like nobody had cleaned that place in a long time. Well, he just went into the main hall. It was all empty, but there was a paper screen in that main hall, and he went in there, and as soon as he saw that paper screen, well, you know what he's gonna do. Yusuke took out his inkstone, he ground some off, mixed it with water, and he took that brush, and he just painted and drew cats on every blank surface of that huge blank canvas he had. And he just got distracted with it, drew for hours and hours, until next thing he knew, he looked outside and the sun was going down. Well, he knew he'd have to spend the night in that old abandoned monastery. He didn't love the idea, but he didn't have any other alternative. So in that hall, right next to that paper screen that he had drawn cats on, large ones, small ones, fat ones, skinny ones, behind there, he found a little cupboard, and he was able to squeeze himself into this cupboard and shut the door behind him. Well, he laid down there and he went to sleep, but then he woke up. Woke up in the middle of the night. He heard the most horrible sound he'd ever heard in his life. Some sort of creature screaming and yowling. He heard claws scratching on the wood of the floor. Yowls that he'd never seen, heard that from any other animal before. He had no idea what kind of creature was out there, but he just stayed shaking, shivering there inside that little cupboard. He just waited for morning. The next day, he could see the sunlight coming in through the cracks, so he pulled open the door to that cupboard. He stood up and stretched, and then he looked at the center of the floor of that great hall. Oh, what is that? Lying there in a pool of blood was a huge, monstrous rat, size of a dog. And that rat was lying there dead, with its big ugly mouth hanging open, scratch marks all across its body, blood everywhere. And then Yusuke, he turned and he looked at that paper screen where he had drawn those cats. And he saw that every cat in his drawing had blood dripping from its fangs and its claws. And some of those cats, he could swear that they were smiling in the drawing. Well, the door to that great hall had opened up, and Yusuke, he turned, he looked. There was a big crowd of monks standing there. And the abbot, he said, "Young man," he bowed low to Yusuke, "you have saved us from that demon rat has haunted this monastery for years now. We've all been in hiding. We haven't been able to live our lives, do anything. This horrible demon rat has been terrifying us for years until you came. And you drew those divine cats, and they tore that rat to shreds. You have saved our monastery. You can stay here as long as you like. You can do whatever you like here. We owe our lives to you." So he did. Yusuke, he moved into that monastery. He didn't become a monk exactly. He just helped out with the chores, and he worked, and most of all, he drew cats. And he drew all the cats that he wanted for as long as he wanted to. Now, the lesson to be learned from Yusuke's story is that there is nothing more unnatural than to not do what comes naturally. And eventually we will find a purpose for what comes naturally. The story of Yusuke, the boy who drew cats from ancient Japan.